Well, we've been talking about relationships, about these commitments and connections that we have to others, whether that's the people who live in our house, spouses, parents, children, whether it's the people that on a regular basis, the people who gather in this space, our actual neighbors, all these webs of relationships that keep us connected to one another. Now, last comes the hardest part. I, as a pastor, very often engage in what I like to call relationship coaching. Right? People come to me from time to time, usually not when things are great, but once they've started to fall apart. Pastor, they say, we can't get along. And I say, great, let's sit and let's talk. And I'm shocked. I'm always shocked, because nobody's relationships have conflicts, right? And we sit down together, and I would say a good 75% of the time, one of the first things that is said to me is, they're not the same person they were when we met. They've changed. And it's taken 15 years of being a pastor and a lifetime of prayer and every ounce of self-control I have to not just go, well, duh. They're supposed to. We forget that. We forget that about ourselves and about others. I've said it before, and you'll hear me say it again. If you were to go outside those back doors and walk out into the woods behind this church, you would find two sorts of things, and only two. You would find things that are growing and things that are rotting. That's it. It's either one or the other. Nothing out there stays the same. Nothing. In all of God's creation, nothing stays the same. It's either growing or rotting. Now, the question for us as disciples and in our relationship is, which are we doing at this moment in our lives? Are we growing or are we dying? Are we growing or are we rotting? Now, it's hard enough to think about what it means for me to grow. What it means for me to be that good soil that Jesus describes, because that's what he calls us to be. He calls us to become this good soil that produces fruit, and that's hard enough. But then to be that in relationship to other people who are also growing and changing, that's the struggle. In every relationship you have, in every commitment and web of connection that you have to another person, you and they are called to be growing together. Paul says it at the end of 1 Corinthians 13. Again, we love this passage, but we don't always read it all the way through. Paul says, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child, I spoke like a child. But now that I've become an adult, I've put away those childish things. That's our call together. So how does this work? What does it look like to grow not just as a disciple, because we believe and we are committed that disciples never stop growing. We believe and we are committed as a community of faith to setting those deep roots in good soil that Jesus calls us to. But what does that look like in the context of relationship? I want you to think back And think about a time when your faith has grown the most. Think about one of those times when your faith has taken one of those light year jumps forward, right? Because it happens sometimes in our lives, right? Well, we're coasting along and then all of a sudden our faith jumps forward. I wonder what else accompanied that jump forward in your faith. I wonder what else accompanied that movement from one place to another in your life and your faith. Think about that for a moment. So, I know, as a pastor and a person of faith myself, the times that I have grown the most in my faith are directly after I have screwed up. Directly after I have stepped right into the middle of it, said something I ought not to have said, done something I ought not to have done, and looked back and said, well, I don't want to do that again. And looked back and said, man, what an idiot I was. Do you have any of those moments? Here's the deal. 9 times out of 10, our faith grows out of one or two situations. It grows mostly out of either those times in our lives when we are struggling, when we have hardship that we face, or when we make big old mistakes. And we learn from them. That's the second part. And we learn from them, right? So if you're in a relationship with someone else and you're committed to growing with them, guess what they're going to do? Make big old mistakes. Being committed to growing together in relationship with other people, relationship of every sort, co-workers, neighbors, friends, family, means that there is space for all of us to step in it, to make mistakes, to mess up, to do it wrong. There has to be. Otherwise, we will never grow. If we don't make those mistakes, if we don't make those errors and learn from them, we will never grow, which means the people in our lives need to have space to make mistakes. That means that we need to be forgiving and merciful and compassionate to those mistakes in people's lives around us, right? One mistake can't end the relationship, or else you'll never grow. One mistake can't ruin the relationship, or else you'll never change. To be in a relationship that's committed to growth is to be in a relationship that's committed to forgiveness. Forgiveness. So I was working in my garden this last week. Maybe you were too, trying to recover from yet another stupid winter freeze. Yet another round of cutting out all the dead stuff. And as I got the soil ready, I did what maybe you did too. Did you put any fertilizer down? Right? Enrich the soil, help things grow. And the best fertilizer, of course, is manure, right? Mistakes are the manure of a healthy, growing relationship. You need them. You need some manure in your life. Because we've all got it. The question is whether you admit it and use it to help you grow or not. Till it into the soil. These mistakes and errors that you make as well, to be clear, and also the people in your relationships make too. That's how we begin to grow. A relationship where there is a give and a take, where I make mistakes and you make mistakes, and neither of us is expected to always get it right, because we won't. We never will. We never will. Relationships that are committed to grow are relationships that are merciful and forgiving and have space for error in them. So we're committed to helping others grow. To be clear, I can't control whether or not you study the Bible, come to worship on Sunday morning, pray every day. I have no control over that. But here's the thing we can always do as we are committed to growing together. I'm in relationship with all of you, every one of you. I got your name on my list. And I pray for each and every one of you by name. Relationships that are committed to growth are relationships that are committed to praying for one another. We believe that prayer is powerful and prayer changes the world. I can't control what you do and how you grow, but I can pray for your faith. I can pray for the Spirit to be poured out on your heart and your life. I can pray for God to be made known in your life in a way that sparks amazing things in your life. If we're going to be in real relationship with other people, we must. This is not an it would be nice. We must pray for those people. All of them. Regularly. When we're happy with them and when we're struggling in the relationship. We must be people of prayer. Committing to growth in relationship makes space for errors. Committing to growth in relationship prays for God to be poured out in that person's life. Not in the ways I want, but in the ways they need. Finally, to be committed to relationships that grow is to recognize that there are seasons. If we grow and change, there are seasons in our relationships. There are people that 10 years ago I talked to every day that now I talk to once a year. Because those relationships have changed as we have grown. They've gone in one way and I've gone in another. It doesn't mean that they're a terrible person or that I'm a terrible person. It means that we've grown. And there are other people that are new in my life that I didn't know 3 years ago, but now I talk to regularly and I hold in prayer regularly. To be committed to growth in relationship recognizes that we have these seasons in our lives where we move in and out of relationships with other people, where we grow closer and farther apart, where we do one thing and they choose another thing, and that's okay. I think often we beat ourselves up over this, right? Like, oh, why don't I stay in touch with such and such and so and so? Because they're off doing their other thing in that part of their life, and I'm over here doing this thing. And they're very different. We used to do the same thing. We've grown. We've changed, and that's okay. That's what it's supposed to happen. You're supposed to grow and change. You're supposed to do new things and find new things and encounter new people. The best relationships I've found are the ones that can, in fact, endure that. The person that I've not talked to for 5 years that I know I could pick up the phone today and call them and we would pick up like nothing had changed. Because we love one another, even though we've gone in different directions. And we care for one another, even though we've gone in different directions. And in the midst of that, then also, don't forget those new relationships. Do you have any new plants in your garden after we've recovered from another stupid winter freeze? Right? I would say a third of my garden is new, maybe. Now, I like to be a hands-off gardener. I like to ignore my garden and just let it go, which I can often do for seasons. I try and plant it in such a way that there are plants that can endure a little bit of benign neglect. But when I first plant anything, I got to be out there every night making sure it's watered. Every night making sure that it's taking root, because those newest plants need the most care. It's true about relationships too. Very often those newest ones that come in this new season need the most attention, need the most care, need the most tending. Not because they're more important or the others are less important, but because that's the season. Everything moves in seasons. And that's good. And that's holy. And that's the way God created all of this earth. You aren't unique from the rest of God's creation. You should be growing, just like everything else. You need room to make mistakes, just like everything else. You need prayer, perhaps more than everything else. And you too have seasons. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, reason like a child, think like a child, but now that I've become an adult, I have put an end to childish things. My friends, as we grow a community here in this space, a community that is committed to deep roots of faith that can withstand the storms of life, my prayer is that we will also grow deep relationships with one another. That's our commitment as a community, to grow deeper in relationship with God and also with one another. Because deep, mature relationships, growing relationships that reflect the reality of who God has called us to be, are one of the ways that God answers our prayer. The ways that God takes care of us through the ups and downs of life. You were placed here for the sake of everybody else sitting around you. You were called to this place for these relationships. It's also true of your family and your workplace and your neighborhood. God put you where you are for a reason. Grow, blossom, bloom in relationship with God and with one another. Amen.